Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our third Playlist for Learning Grantee webinar. It's produced on behalf of the sixth Digital Media and Learning Competition, which is administered by Haystack with support from the MacArthur Foundation. I'm Cheryl Grant. I am the Director of Social Networking for the DML competition, and I will be your host for the next roughly 50 minutes or so. Before I introduce our special guests today, I want to let people know how you can participate and ask questions. If you have questions, please use the Zoom chat window in the platform, and we're going to end up moving them into the Google Doc. And after Convergence Design Lab has walked through their slides, we will get to questions and people can chime in, and we'll kind of go through them in an orderly way. So let me introduce our guests. I'm very excited about today's webinar. 100 years from now, when people are watching our webinar, they will want to know that playlist design is very new and very exciting, and we're learning as we go. And Convergence Design Lab has been right at the center of this, working kind of shoulder to shoulder with the people at LRNG, so we're very excited to have their expertise. Mindy Faber and her dean at Columbia, Dean Eric Friedman, they lead a team of learning experience designers. We're going to meet some of them today. Margaret Conway, who's program manager, and Kelsey Green, who's manager of learning resources. They are designers and strategists with over 50 years of collective experience in developing, implementing, evaluating, and researching initiatives in youth media, digital learning, participatory civic media, whole school reform, and learner-centered design. So I am going to immediately toss over to them and let them walk us through their slides to talk a little bit about playlist learning design.
Oh. Thanks, Cheryl. So I guess we're going to go ahead and share our slide deck with you. I hope. Here in a sec. But while we're kind of figuring that out, give you just a little bit more background on Convergence Design Lab. We're actually part of Columbia College Chicago, as Cheryl mentioned, and we began doing some playlist design work with LRNG back in April, I think, of this year. And we were really excited by the possibility of doing this kind of work. We had been working a lot with teachers and collaborating in a kind of working around professional development with both K through 12 teachers and with youth media practitioners. And we were excited about the possibilities of reaching more teachers and kind of spreading. We're deeply engaged in the connected learning work, and we're really interested in sort of spreading the gospel of connected learning to teachers and also more youth media practitioners. So we began doing that work. We can go ahead. Some of the playlist work that we've done so far included One Summer Chicago and Washington, D.C., which we created a job-ready collection. A collection of playlists. There were 3 playlists in all. Mm-hmm. The playlist had about 6 XPs per playlist, something like that. And those were really successful. We learned a lot from doing those. And then we were started to be engaged more directly in Chicago-based work. So we began working with LRNG Chai, as we call it here. And we've been designing playlists mostly around kind of workforce readiness fields. So now we're actually going to be working with One Summer Chicago this summer. And there's about 20,000 youth that could potentially be using the playlist that we're designing for them. And also the Economic Awareness Council and the YMCA.
Yeah, so today, I'm Margaret, by the way, Margaret Conway. I'm the program manager at Convergence Design Lab. Today, kind of based on some of the needs expressed by the different grantees, we're going to cover just some basics around knowing your user and their learning ecosystem, designing goal-driven XPs, and then touch a little bit on sequencing and scaffolding XPs within playlists. And I think it's just important to remember that these aren't hard and fast rules. These are sort of tips that we have developed based on our experience designing different playlists. So it'll basically be some general considerations and then some specific examples. And so we just wanted to begin with the idea of first really knowing your user and their learning ecosystem.
And I'm just doing a check because we can't see what you're seeing necessarily. Is everyone seeing our slides right now?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay, yay. Okay, so what we talked a little bit about, we really want this webinar to really kind of give you some very concrete tips on how to get into the anatomy of playlist design. However, before we kind of do that, we wanted to kind of pull out and see a little bit of the larger picture, because we feel like it's important to realize that your learner doesn't operate in a vacuum, and neither does your organization. So you shouldn't be designing playlists in a vacuum either. It's really important to think about your learner and the learning ecosystem that they operate in. So here, oh, I'm sorry, go back. So here are a couple of questions that we think is really important for you to take note of before you begin even designing your playlist. Who is your learner and how do you connect with them? Who is the assessor who provides feedback and playlist and awards badges? Who are the allies that can unlock opportunities and recognize those badges? And what do you need to do logistically? Because a lot of this is logistics to ensure that all the actors in the ecosystem are prepared for successful rollout, meaning training, assessment, and badging. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through a little bit of an example and we're going to use ourselves as an example. So Convergence, say we're Convergence Design Lab and we want to design some learning playlists. The first thing that we need to be able to do is define our learner. In our case, we're going to say we want to reach 14 to 16-year-old non-dominant youth in the city of Chicago to engage them in a playlist about how to take civic action through social media and civic technologies. So currently, Convergence doesn't run programs for youth in the city, so it really makes sense for us to partner with an organization or a network that does. So we want to find a program that's a natural fit, one that's already delivering a curriculum that's aligned to the same kind of overarching mission. We're thinking of approaching After School Matters, a city agency that offers hundreds of choice-based workshops to youth all year long. So we're kind of hoping that they can connect us to some after-school programs that work with youth around social justice issues. And we know that there's about 300 youth that kind of fit that bill a year. Another option we might consider is to collaborate directly with teachers at a few high schools. We already know some of the principals locally here in Chicago, and we think we can reach about 1,000 students if we can introduce our playlist to students directly through the civics courses and the digital media courses. So we're thinking that we could approach the principals, and they might like working with Columbia College and provide the opportunity to provide these really engaging supplementary experiential learning opportunities to their students. So in these examples, the partner serves as a mediator that can help us achieve a number of our objectives. This is really important. They can recommend a few youth to serve on an advisory or co-design team. We know we need to talk to youth if we're going to make engaging playlists, that we need their input. So our partner is going to be able to recommend user testers and even set up user testing time and space on site where we can work with youth directly. They can also be trained to provide onboarding where youth are introduced to the platform and led through a process of setting up an account. So the teachers can be trained to help us in this process. We also know that these facilitators and teachers know next to nothing about learning playlist and the learning platform, so we have to plan to develop training materials and conduct workshops for them so that they can roll out the platform in a prepared and confident way. So we do all of that. Yay! We're tapping into the learning ecosystem. The mediation and onboarding partner will help us ensure that we reach our target user and assist us in delivering the learning content that we've designed. Next. So now we have these playlists. We have aligned, we have a partner that is aligned around similar shared goals, and they're helping us with some of the logistical things that we at Convergence Design Lab just don't have the capacity to do. Next one. So the next thing that we need to kind of plan for is who is going to be the assessor and who's going to award the badges. So at the same time that we're beginning to design playlists, we're also working in the background simultaneously, concurrently, to build these partnerships with mediators and to build partnerships with assessors. Once the playlists have been introduced to the youth and they've completed them, we need to determine how the artifacts they've produced will be assessed. So we're building a smart rubric that can help anyone with basically anyone can do the assessment process quick and easily. While we love the idea of reaching over 1,000 youth with playlists, I only have a 3-person staff, so I'm not sure if my team and I have the capacity to do this for 1,000 youth. But so maybe I'm thinking, should I scale back and not try and reach 1,000 youth? Maybe only 300 is fine. But hey, I work at Columbia College, and we are the largest media art school in the country. So maybe I can have my students, some of the students at Columbia College that are in the capstone journalism class, serve as authentic badge issuers and reviewers. Yay, we're tapping into our learning ecosystem. Our badge issuing and assessment partner is going to help ensure that we review completed playlists in a timely manner, because we know the sooner the youth get feedback, the better. We also know that the freshman high school students will be psyched to have college students reviewing their work. Win, win, win. Next slide. So the final step, once the badges have been issued, the very last thing we know that we need to do is to ensure that these credentials awarded to youth have some recognizable value or currency. We have a lot of our own ideas, but we wanted to hear directly from our youth. So we put our youth advisory team together and we talked to them and had a focus group about what matters most. The youth advisory team came up with 1 million ideas, some crazy and out of control, but a lot of really creative and imaginative solutions that were really highly motivating to them as far as the types of opportunities that could be unlocked. So we are in the process of working with a variety of partners to make that happen. So yay again, we tapped into our learning ecosystem and we met our aim to design playlists that have real currency for youth. My final comment about this is the way in which we define currency is the accumulation of various competencies acquired through interest-driven learning experiences, combined with the recognition and the validation of those competencies that lead to unlocked opportunities. In this way, we're doing our part to foster a more equitable learning ecosystem.
Great, thanks. All right, so after sort of considering the wide view of the ecosystem, we think it's really important to also spend a lot of time looking into the user experience. Some considerations about the users. What youth are you targeting? It's important to kind of know who your learner is in at least a very general way. Maybe imagine a scenario where the youth are completing a playlist. Who are they? What kinds of popular culture references are important to them? What kinds of opportunities unlocked might be meaningful to them? How much choice do they want? So it's important to kind of really consider who will be completing your playlists. Secondly, how and when can you involve youth in the process? I know a number of you are hoping to do co-design with youth, which is really great. Also, user testing is really important when designing playlists. It's also important to do user testing with a group that is demographically close to your target group, your target users. So think about that. And third, what's the context in which it'll be completed? So how will the playlist be rolled out? Who will be involved? Mindy talked about this, but what adults might be helping administer the playlist? Another thing to think about in context is what kind of technology is available for youth. Will they be doing this anywhere on their phones, or will they be doing this in a computer lab at a high school, for example? How much time might youth have to complete it. For example, recently we designed a playlist with career and technical education in Chicago Public Schools, and we knew that teachers would be helping roll out the playlist in a computer lab or a classroom with their students, and it needed to be completed in under an hour. So that's a really specific context that we had to consider when we designed the playlist. The other thing might be academic constraints. So it's important to just know whether reading level or language is something to consider when you're designing your XPs. Next, we wanted to talk about where to sort of begin with your particular content or your curriculum or your goals, and kind of how to make those flow into relevant XPs. So there's sort of a helpful 3-step process that we've found helpful, at least, to outline very broadly what success looks like for youth who complete your playlist, and then to start with learning goals, crafting them into goals that are very specific and measurable, and you can answer the question, what skills demonstrate success for this playlist? And then finally, after that, to design activities that get at those learning goals that are production-oriented and that youth find relevant and worthwhile. So starting with the idea of what does success look like, consider, you might want to consider outlining a portrait of a successful user. I think you might have done something like this at the very first meeting of the grantees, sort of a user persona. Another option is to make it kind of a mission statement. If it's a mission statement, you would describe the who, so what's your youth population, the what, so the theme or the content that they'll be engaging with, the how, so how they'll be engaging with the content, what the main activities are that they'll be doing, and then why, or what the key result is that you're hoping for at the end. And then something that I find really helpful, crafting really solid learning goals is important, and you likely have learning goals from your existing content to draw from, which is great. One important thing about playlists, though, is that the more you can turn your learning goals into what we call SMART goals, the simpler it'll be then to design and assess the XP. So a SMART goal is a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound or timely. So for example, one of the goals from our Job Ready collection of playlists was for youth to understand the importance of arriving on time for workplace success, and the fact that it takes planning to be able to arrive on time. So to turn that into a SMART goal, we might word it, for example, as youth will describe the route they will take to work this summer, what type of transportation they'll use, and the time they'll leave to get there. It's specific to their route to work. It's measurable because you could look at what a youth says and sort of check off whether they included each of these things. It's attainable because it's not really out of reach for most youth. And it's directly relevant to the planning they'll need to do for the summer. And it's time-bound because it has to do with this summer job experience. Here's another example from the Berkman Klein Center's Digital Literacy Resource Platform. And I just wanted to thank them for letting us use their content as a really concrete example. This is just one learning goal from a module about online reputation that was originally designed as an in-person workshop. It's important to note that we found that it usually makes the most sense when an XP addresses only one learning goal. The workshop that we drew this learning goal from has 4 or 5 learning goals because it's a whole workshop. So if you were to use this particular content, the workshop might be several different XPs. I pulled out one learning goal. So here this learning goal says, students will be able to recommend ways to respond to internet content about themselves that they do not like. In this reputation module, one of the sort of teaching points was that the best way to get unwanted results about you pushed down onto the second page of a search engine was to start creating and managing content about yourself that reflects you in a positive light. So the goal was just students recommending ways to respond to internet content about themselves. If we were to turn that into a SMART goal, one way would be to say, youth will create one example of positive, truthful content about themselves online. So because of the way this SMART goal is worded, hopefully you can start to see some possibilities emerging for the kinds of activities youth would be able to engage in an XP. Clearly they'd be producing something, and there are lots of options there. So the other thing, not only will be creating SMART goals start to help you narrow down activity ideas, a strong SMART goal can be your criteria for assessment. Right? So regardless of whether youth are creating a new social media profile or writing a blog or creating something else online, you're always assessing this first part, whether they created an example of positive, truthful content about themselves. So here are some possible XP submissions on the right that could relate to this SMART goal. Youth could start or edit a social media profile to manage their online identity. They could start or contribute to a blog. And I wanted to ask here if anyone has any other suggestions or ideas for something that might be an XP activity that students could engage in that would get at this SMART goal. So if anyone wants to throw that in the chat, Kelsey can look at the document for me. Wait just a moment. I can only see my full screen, so I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So what are you asking them again?
I was asking, is there one other possible XP activity that someone might be able to do to get at this SMART goal of creating one example of positive, truthful content about themselves online? So the two that I put in are starting or editing a social media profile, or starting or contributing to a blog.
Okay.
Here's one.
Okay. Which was?
Here we go. Edgar Quintilla says they could submit to a design challenge on discoverdesign.org.
Great. Awesome. Great and relevant. So youth could submit to a Discover Design Challenge online. They would still be creating one example of positive, truthful content about themselves.
Go ahead and say it out loud. Voice it.
Kelsey's going to
Okay,
post
yeah.
it.
One suggestion is having users create a short video profile similar to an elevator speech of his or herself. So I'm sharing.
Yeah, creating a video profile. That's really interesting. Because the other thing is maybe this, the amount of choice you give is up to you. Maybe this XP could be part of a really specific effort to get youth to create a robust LinkedIn profile. So you might just be asking them specifically to contribute one thing to LinkedIn. Or maybe you leave it open and you give them a couple of options. So you can give them the option to do something on social media or to do something on a blog or to create a video for themselves. So as long as the criteria is really clear and you use clear language, youth will know what they're being assessed on. One more example from the Berkman Center from a module about healthy relationships online. This is targeted to youth who work as peer leaders and mentors. So the learning goal was participants will explore how they as peer leaders can address the opportunities or challenges of social media and social networks for relationships in their own peer teaching activities. One way to make that into a SMART goal is to say, youth will identify 2 unhealthy relationship issues and 2 specific actions to address them as an upstander. Again, we're not saying exactly what youth will produce in the XP yet. We're saying that we're looking for 2 issues and 2 solutions. So here are some possible XP submissions might be, these youth might identify 2 specific actions and 2 specific issues and 2 specific actions, and they might create a shareable infographic, or they might create a video addressing how to be an upstander for unhealthy relationship issues, right?
Or even in the program.
Another idea would be maybe they're all working to create a resource website populated with different content around being an upstander. So each youth who creates something could then upload it to a site that other peer leaders could use to kind of help others navigate unhealthy relationship issues. So these are just some concrete ways to take what might be a lot of existing content and start to drill down and think about concrete activities youth can complete in playlist form. Again, the playlist won't replace everything, all of your content, but if you're really specific about this design process, it can be a great complement that youth find relevant to your lives. So just some general tips about designing XPs that I wanted to finish this section with. One is less is more. So continue to have high expectations for youth, but keep it simple and open for creativity. So allowing youth space to innovate and to be creative, and just be very clear about what you're looking for. In general, in our experience, 1 XP should equal 1 concrete activity. So when looking at your pre-existing content, and this is something we're happy to talk about one-on-one as well, because it can sort of take some ideating, look for 1 learning goal, 1 XP to equal 1 concrete thing that youth make or do. And in that same vein, try to think about making it production-oriented. So how can learning happen mainly by doing rather than just by consuming information? And then finally, use straightforward language as much as possible. That seems self-explanatory, but sort of in the different areas of the XP, in the description, in the show and prove section, and anywhere else youth might be engaging with your content on a playlist, try to be explicit with your language. And then finally, we just wanted to share a few considerations around sequencing and scaffolding content for playlists. Most importantly, we wanted you to take a look at the LRNG resources, the playlist practitioner guide that was shared with you, as well as the playlist planning tool. They contain extremely helpful examples of different playlists and the breakdown of XPs in them that I think can really shed some light on the best way to sequence and scaffold. The playlist planning tool uses the example of our Job Ready suite that Convergence designed last summer. But I'll talk about that description or that example right now. So here are a few things that we think are helpful to think about with regards to sequencing and scaffolding. First, consider what youth are building towards. So can you break it down into parts or themes? Look at your content, see what themes emerge. For example, with our Job Ready suite set of playlists that we've talked about, the goal was to prepare youth for a 6 to 8 week summer job experience. So that was a whole lot of possible content. So we were able to list it all out and then broke down the content to 3 different themes, which I'll share on the next slide in a minute. The next consideration was what skills are needed to demonstrate success. So just go back to your user portrait or your mission statement or your overall learning goals and think about the skills that are needed to demonstrate success and what order they go in. What's a logical order of skills that build on each other? And then finally, what sets of skills can you put together into a playlist? So let's look at the example of the Job Ready collection. Like I said, this is a large amount of sort of ideas, of things that youth needed to understand for a 6 to 8 week job experience. And so the way we broke it down was these sort of 3 themes. Know your power, so focused on youth being able to demonstrate their personal strengths, articulate their skills and their long-term goals. And then know your employer's power, so focusing on the company culture they might be going into, researching their employer and the company they'd be going to, and then their job description or their job requirements. So the idea was that if a youth knows how to talk about their own strengths and their own skills and their long-term goals, if they know what their employer is sort of expecting and what it is like there to the best of their ability, then they can create what we called my power plan. So they could plan for success. They could plan getting to work on time, dressing appropriately for the company culture, being ready to take feedback from an employer and sort of manage that for themselves. So we broke down the XPs under those 3 themes into 3 playlists. And then finally, just some final thoughts. Like I said before, this is a really nice chance for you to innovate with a new platform. You know your learner and their ecosystem best. These were just sort of tips. Trust your instincts to be able to innovate and user test and iterate on your ideas. And then also Mindy's idea of currency.
Yeah, so we had a couple of requests for that sort of definition, but here it is again. So aim to create real currency for your youth. That's really challenging to do, but that's what makes all this work worth it. The currency, the way we define that currency again, is this accumulation of interest-driven experiences and competencies that are then recognized and validated, and which lead to unlocked opportunities.
And then finally, when you're in doubt, just use some animated GIFs, because they're funny and fun and kids like them. You'll see any of the Convergence playlists pretty much use GIFs in all the XPs. And then before we take some questions, we just wanted to put some contact info up there.
Yeah, so if you are interested in partnering with Convergence Design Lab for, tailored technical assistance or design support, make sure you just, send me an email and I can send you a kind of sheet describing the different types of things that we can do. We really love partnering with people around playlist design, so reach out to us for sure.
Great, thank you, Margaret and Mindy and Kelsey. I am looking over the questions and I'm wondering, Christina from National Writing Project, one of our DML playlists for learning grantees, would you like to unmute and ask your question about the role of play in playlists?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I was just copying that currency definition because that's really helpful, so thank you. So yeah, I mean, we're just, we're working on our playlists right now, and we're coming up to a meeting where a group of us are going to get together and look across what we've been designing. And so a question that's come up is that sometimes when we're doing these, we're taking content that we've been supporting, things that we've been doing with youth when we're face-to-face, right, often. And then we're actually moving them into online environments and asking youth to test and tinker with this stuff sort of in their own space, in their own time, in their own, right? And so then thinking about, okay, but what is the role? So play is one of the things that I start coming back to. Like, okay, so what is the role of play in supporting, as well as clear directions, as well as clear steps, as well as all that, but also, and interest driven. How do we bring sort of that kind of experimenting, because you talk about the youth having experiences as well as demonstrating skills, right? So like, how do we really support experiential learning and discovery and play within these playlists too? I guess that's something I've just been thinking about, wondering about, and thinking that it probably supports greater completion ultimately, and greater success and happiness with this work overall. Yeah. So,
something we didn't. Do you have something to say?
Yeah.
Something we didn't touch on because it just wasn't really time in this webinar was resources. So I think that could be a helpful way to look at play. So really being intentional about the resources that you choose. Maybe they're games, right? Maybe there's also the possibility of creating your own resources. We've done the same thing where we felt like playing around with some ideas were more important than sort of consuming the content. And so we created a Twine game as a resource. And the XP was playing through the Twine game, maybe sharing.
Right, that's it. Because the Twine is actually a game where you create stuff as you're going, right?
It's kind of like a choose your own adventure game.
Yeah, and you write it as you do it.
In ours, they had sort of almost like scenarios, and chose what to do, but I think there's a lot you can do with twine.
But you can tailor that
Right.
to the content that you're working
Right.
with.
Yeah.
In our twine games, user tested at the highest level. So out of all the resources that we were doing, it's when we took the extra time and effort to actually create a tailored resource instead of just using what's already been developed is, you know, because in theory, you should be able to go to the internet and get all these amazing resources. But then when you're trying to really find that perfect resource and it doesn't exist, sometimes you really need to be prepared to create that resource yourself.
Right. Right. Great.
And yeah.
Thank you.
What do you think?
About playlist creation, Paul, do you want to unmute and ask your question about who will be guiding the youth? I think that might have been specific to an earlier slide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm echoing some of Christina's issues. The way teachers who are developing playlists talk about it is how to develop playlists when you take the teacher out of the picture, right? Yet we know that's probably not going to happen so much. So, and then sort of an additional question to that, I think, is that we have some teachers developing playlists who are relatively traditional teachers and haven't worked online before with kids, right? So, you know, I'm just imagining there is a range of experience that the mentors, teachers will have with the young people. So how do we account for that? I guess I'm wondering. And I don't think there are any easy answers to that, but
Well, I think
what we're messing with. Yeah.
that is the goal, though. The goal is that the young person is doing the activity and going through the experience on their own or in concert with their peers, right? But we know that learning is social and it's contextualized in the situation that where it exists, right? Where it unfolds. So you don't want to ignore the context, right? You want to harness the context, but the goal is learning experience design. And learning experience design is very different than the way we work with teachers all the time. And it's very different from the way that they have been educated to teach, right? And so my immediate reaction is to try to leverage the role of the teacher strategically as mentor in that space, but to allow the playlist to function as a guide to, it's so youth-centered and it's so engaging for the young person to do, and it's so empowering for them to do it on their own, right? That's the real important piece there, is that they have some independence and some freedom and some choice in the matter of what they create and what they make.
And I think guiding teachers around the learning goals discussion can be helpful that way, right? They're not going to achieve all the learning goals of their class within a playlist, right? Can you sort of think about it as what might youth be able to make or do that's really relevant to them, that allows them to practice similar skills to what the other content the teacher might be teaching, right? But it's totally in the youth space. And how can we take your learning goals and make them into SMART goals that are related to something that youth could make or do? And it's almost like a complementary, parallel, authentic project in a way. That might be helpful. I know what you mean.
Fair enough. And the other thing that we're beginning to explore are ways of identifying youth. You know, you said they're working peer-to-peer, but we're identifying youth who have accomplished a badge, earned a badge, becoming, mentors with their other peers. So one teach two kind of notions. So figuring out ways to build that in the process feels important to youth in the room who know how to use hypothesis and can go show somebody, how to do that, for example.
Yeah, and I think that that's important because one of the things, connected learning is not the same as personalized learning, right? And one of the design pillars of connected learning is about peer networks, right? So learning shouldn't just be individualized and separated off from work with peers. But right now, in the functionality of the LRNG platform, and there are other platforms that can do this, but LRNG right now doesn't really allow you to kind of connect or build a group and have a group project and a group submission. So I'm sure there's ways to design around that. But I think I love the fact that you're thinking about ways that youth can do peer-to-peer mentoring through the playlist design. We would love to think about that with you.
Thank you, Paul. I wanted to ask a question. I've had the opportunity to have some conversations with Convergence, and so I just wanted to ask you all, is there, based on your experience working with different clients as they take pre-existing content like our grantees are doing and adapting it to playlists, is there something that you see happening that recurs that maybe our grantees, or I think we have Cities of Learning people also joining us, that you see? One thing that I'm thinking is, if you have pre-existing content that you're delivering in a certain way, does the playlist feel like a proliferation of work, or does it feel like it is fairly easy to chunk it? Maybe you could speak to any sort of common themes that you see, and if there aren't common themes, if you could comment on whether it's easier than people think or more difficult than they think.
I think that I think that less is more idea is a good one to keep in mind when you're taking pre-existing content and breaking it down and looking at a playlist that could be made from it. I think you often want to drill down into really specific activities, but also look at, again, like I said, what can be produced out of it that's really relevant, that doesn't just feel like answering questions online instead of in a discussion, right? So really taking those learning goals that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question. And almost all the playlists, I believe, that we've designed have been original. They haven't been based on existing curriculum. And so we haven't had to wrestle with that particular challenge ourselves yet. We've seen playlists that were designed based on curriculum that we thought fell way short of doing what the promise of the platform is about. And so I think that there's a risk at getting detoured through the curriculum. You're trying to maintain some integrity and, honor the original curriculum. But if the original curriculum was meant to be dealt in a face-to-face situation and with the discussion-based kind of format, that's just not going to work. So you have to kind of go back to the learning goals and the competencies and pull out what works in this platform and what doesn't, and let it go if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's important. Another kind of helpful way to think about it, I think, when you're looking at maybe a large amount of content, for example, is to think about what real-world roles can youth be practicing with this content, and how can you enable them to practice these real-world roles, whether it's I'm practicing being a successful employee, or being kind of an upstander to confront sort of unhealthy relationship issues I see among my peers and their online behavior.
And to really and I love the fact that Margaret's using the word practice, because sometimes we want the playlist to like communicate all this, and the kids will have these major skills and competencies. And really, the theory kind of behind LRNG and connected learning is that, competencies develop over time, right? And they circle back on each other. And the more a young person participates in these sort of experiences and builds these sets of competencies, then, that's kind of how it's working. It's stackable, right?
Right.
And so practicing things in a risk-free, safe environment that feels youth-friendly and supportive is a wonderful gift to give young people.
So yeah, when kind of looking at it, maybe make a persona of that real world role and list out what skills that person has. A writer, for example, if it were a writing playlist. What does a writer do, right? They keep a notebook, they write about their surroundings, they use their senses, right? How can we have you practice those things, do those things for themselves, start creating that persona for themselves, or sort of recognizing those qualities in themselves through the activities of the playlist. And I think that can kind of help you shift the view of the content and pick out the content that makes the most sense and the resources that you already have.
One other question here. Oops, I'm unmuted. Okay. I love the SMART goals. That was really, I think that is going to be a very concrete, useful thing that grantees and people who are designing can use. Can you say a little bit more about at what stage different stakeholders might be involved in that? I loved earlier you were talking about the learning ecosystem, and we know from the badges conversation how important it is to get stakeholders, including teachers who are touching the playlist, the youth who are touching it, any employers. Where would they fit into the SMART goals conversation? Would they influence it?
I think they could. I mean, I think that if you really at any stage, I mean, I think because if SMART goals are strong enough, they can be in every stage, right? They can be a goal before you design anything. They can be your criteria for assessment, and they can also be in the language of the submit and prove, right? So I think that you could involve teachers or employers, for example, in helping you outline what a successful such and such is, right? Whatever you're trying to have, what a successful environmentalist is, what a successful coder can do, things like that. Having them add to that portrait would be really useful, I think.
Yeah, and it's gonna make the work stronger,
yeah,
and better, and it's going to increase the buy-in and build stronger relationships that are more sustainable over time. And we've struck a very interesting and wonderful partnership with the Career Technical Education Program, which is a huge program. It serves 17,000 kids in Chicago public schools are in a career technical pathway. And so to be able to work with those teachers and to work with that program in a very reciprocal way where they're kind of learning, they don't know what this platform is, and this sounds a little crazy to them, right? But when we start talking about competencies and what skills and opportunities and experiences that they want for their kids and what this platform can do, and the fact that it can unlock these opportunities, jobs, access to employers in the real world, authentic experiences like that, they're on board. And I think that that's, proving to be a really powerful. So one of the next playlists that we're hoping to design with them is around jobs. So one of their career technical pathways is digital media. And they need examples of what kinds of roles and jobs you can do in the world around digital media. Well, the playlists lend themselves to that perfectly.
Thank you. And I had one question too. I think that Kylie is on and Nancy as well, who are at LRNG. And I'm really curious to hear if they're also seeing, and I mean this in a positive way, a proliferation of XPs into these very, very, I love the SMART goal kind of approach. So if Nancy or Kylie are there, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, everyone. Hi. I'm Kylie. I think I know almost everybody. Cheryl, you may have to ask that question for me one more time. Are we going back to the discussion around translating curriculum that was developed for other purposes onto the platform?
Yeah, so let me just reframe it in the sense of our grantees. I know they were asked to describe XPs and playlists in the proposal for the grant. And I know listening to Convergence talk about this, that there probably are going to be grantees thinking, okay, so I had 12 XPs, but if I were to do it this way, I now have 40. or, you know, maybe not that many, but I could imagine them going back and saying, am I going to be reiterating and reiterating over and over again to get things this tangible in the SMART goal kind of way? And is that going to proliferate? And is there a point at which there are too many?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. What we have seen that has not been working is that folks are trying to combine multiple learning goals into single XPs, and then things feel very disjointed and teens are confused, or there isn't a coherent narrative for the entire playlist. So the move that we're making internally is to go with smaller focused playlist that can be scaffolded or built upon. That gives teens the opportunity to really do something start to finish that's meaningful and focused, has a clear outcome. It's very similar to what the Convergence folks were just talking about. Thanks, Margaret and Mindy, for all of that. It was really fun to hear your perspectives. But yes, I do see the danger in proliferation because you can end up very quickly with multiple XPs. I think the work, so if you're looking at it from a workload perspective, I think it actually makes your work easier because you're more focused and you're really making sure that you have resources that are guiding you to that specific learning goal. Is there a maximum limit for learning goals per XP? Ed, that's a good question. I would stick with one if it was me. Otherwise, you end up trying to cram too many resources in and you end up in the playlist within a playlist situation where you've got kids trying to work their way through 4 or 5 different resources within the context of one single XP. And that seems like just too large of a learning unit for this particular format.
And so would you also see through a playlist, and this is for Convergence and for Kylie, both of you have a lot of expertise with this, but are you seeing people using the playlist to increase the complexity of those SMART goals or learning goals? Each time they go through an XP, it could be very similar, but it's getting a little bit more demanding. Is that something people should also be looking for? So maybe not so many learning goals, maybe not so much content, but more building the scaffolding in terms of competence through that playlist?
Definitely one way to go. I think that's one approach for sure, and it would be an excellent one depending on what you're trying to do, right? Are there a whole bunch of skills that you need to have to be able to do something? For example, like our job playlist, they're usually discrete, separate learning goals because the youth needs to know their route to work. They need to know about receiving feedback, things like that, separate things. But you also certainly, if you're looking at a skill like, I don't know, coding or something like that, you might be able to just sort of scaffold on similar goals throughout a playlist. I think that would be really interesting.
So, hi everybody, I'm Nancy.
Nancy.
Learning designer at LRNG. One other thought is just to throw in there is this idea of scope. And I think that you may have just sort of touched on it in your last comment. But this idea of even maybe before your learning goals, you look at the scope of sort of your idea or the skill or the concept, right, that you'd be addressing in the learning goal. So sort of one easy, I think, comparison is if you take an idea like photography, right, versus another idea like pitching an idea, right? And you could sort of see that, those are 2 possible sort of, program or even like sort of lesson ideas that you can start with. And then if you sort of look at those through the lens of scope, you can see how something like photography is so broad and sort of so big that the next step, I think that maybe would be helpful would be to sort of look at photography and then break it down into chunks. And then I think if one goes through that process, and this kind of touches on what Kylie was talking about, you can see that those chunks would then sort of be potentially 3 different playlists, right? So maybe one chunk is, the actual sort of like the theme of, doing a photography project around a community sort of photo series, right? And then another chunk / playlist would be, photo editing. And then another chunk or playlist would be sort of the basics of photography. So actually within that sort of broad idea, you have 3 playlists, and then you sort of whittle down and look at those 3 playlists, and then start to look at your learning goals and your XPs. And then again, sort of with the example of taking a really specific idea, like pitching an idea, you wouldn't really need to chunk that idea because it's already specific. So you could take your learning goal and really start to sort of design your playlist and your XP. So,
and one of your strategies there too, I love the photography example, but because it just lends itself perfectly to this, but they could be building a Instagram account from the very beginning. So the very first thing that they do is start their Instagram account, and that they're using that to upload has evidence of their accomplishment of each of those sort of XPs, and building this sort of portfolio over time. And then actually that portfolio then should become actually a record of growth, becomes a growth portfolio in a sense, that shows that they could then show to employers or to other people that they're actually really developing their skills. Look how terrible my pictures were in the beginning, and look what I'm doing now.
Well, thank you so much. I want to be mindful of people who might be scurrying to their next meeting. It's 3:00, and this has been so interesting. We are, so thank you, everybody, for a great conversation. We're going to have a full video recording of this webinar. It will be on haystack.org, and I'll also send it to the DML Playlist for Learning listserv. And I think Kylie and her team, Nancy, will be circulating it to any of the Cities of Learning people who want to take it back to their teams. We are, there were just a hint of some questions about assessment. We do have a really interesting one coming up on Thursday, December 7th from 2 to 3 Eastern Time. It'll be our 4th DML Playlist for Learning grantee webinar with Gurley Delacruz, who's also at LRNG. So bring your assessment questions. I think that is going to also be a really important conversation to have. And so thank you to everybody. We are going to keep having this conversation. We'll be doing roundtable, round robin, I guess we call them, webinars with all of our grantees. So we'll hear a little bit about people's experiences with us, and it'll be really interesting to have that come to the surface. And also, our 11 grantees will be posting blogs in December, talking a little bit about their experiences, and I hope people feel comfortable talking about what didn't work just as much as what did work, so we can all learn from each other. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Convergence for taking a lot of time out of your day to come and share what your expertise is about with our grantees. And thanks to everybody else for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys, bye-bye.